Ready to go? Okay. All right, folks, we'll come back to order. And we met with both councils here a few minutes ago and kind of decided if the commission will concur that we'll add 15 minutes to the questioning, for folks to, for testimony, for folks to come up. And then the applicant asked that their time be reserved for rebuttal. And so they both agreed that that'll work fine that way. What we're probably going to do is we're going to break for lunch here about noon. The commission, we're going to have lunch next door over here, so we don't have to go out. And then we'll try to get back a little bit before 1 to get started. But what I would like to do, Dr. LaRocca has some...
But you need a motion to extend the time.
Okay, let's get a motion to do that. 15 minutes.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make that motion for additional 15 minutes.
Okay.
Second.
Second? All right, we can do this by voice vote. All those in favor of extending the time for testimony signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Okay, we'll add 15 minutes to the time for testimony with the time reserved for the applicant for a rebuttal of up to 15 minutes. And with that, Dr. LaRocca has testified, and I'm going to ask him to come back up, and if we have any questions, he has to go and has patients this afternoon, and so I'd like to ask him to come back up, and if the commission has any questions, particularly for him, we'll open it at this time, and then after that, then we're going to break for lunch. But the commissioners,
And just remember, too, that his wife is here, she'll stay, and so if it's anything related to their property that she could answer,
Right.
that could happen as well.
Sure. So, commissioners, do you have any questions for Dr. LaRocca? Anything that he's testified about?
I do.
Okay. Mr. McWilliams?
Dr. LaRocca. You were concerned about several different things. One of the things that stuck with me was your concern about the runoff and, of course, the safety and the deaths and the other things. But I want to ask you just a minute about the runoff. I've heard a lot of, and I wrote it down here because I can't remember yesterday. I've heard a whole lot of I believes and I thinks and this type of thing. Not necessarily from you, but do you all have, for that matter, either side, have any expert testimony relative to runoff and the impact that it may or may not have on properties that are lower in a detrimental way? You said, I want to make sure I got clean water. Absolutely. And you're making an assumption, maybe an educated assumption, maybe not, I don't know. But do you have anything that could help? Because you got some people saying, well, it's not a problem. And you got some people saying, well, it's going to be a problem. And we're sitting here pondering that, having to deal with that, so that's my question.
Yeah, and number one, I am not a hydraulic engineer.
I know that.
Make it clear to you. What I presented was an example that exists on my property, and I walked this stream up to this particular pond that is 20 feet below and maybe 60 feet from the Pulte development, where it appears the tributaries and everything starts, which is different than the Little Huckleberry Creek scenario, but it clearly runs through my land, and over the last 10 years, this lake, or runoff that has appeared on Hartscouple has grown and grown and grown, and this is before, Pulte Cluster Homes. I've been told we have hired engineers, hydraulic people that are going to be looking at this and studying it much more rigorous detail. Am I correct with that statement? Yeah, so those people will be also, commenting and giving their opinion.
Due to time constraints, they didn't complete the study prior to the.
So we're not going to hear any of that today.
Well, yeah, and let's kind of try to direct our questions to Dr. LaRocca so we can, we'll have the opportunity to ask those.
I don't have any other
Okay.
at this point.
Anyone else have anything for,
I'm just gonna tell you, our traffic engineer, like I said, I think that's the go back to like,
okay. Okay. Is there any additional questions for Dr. LaRocca before we let him go? Mr. Talbot, do you have any questions for him?
I do. The only question I have, Dr. LaRocca, I wondered if we could get the slide, and I'd like you to identify where your farm is compared to where our property is, and Amy is here, that she can pull up mine.
She's Getting our lunch ready.
I just want to be able to identify the location. Okay, so roughly, if I can, I didn't understand where this slide is.
Right, okay, this is, okay, so this is,
Oh, you can draw right on the screen. Just draw right on the screen if you touch it.
Goshen Lane is this. Okay. All right, this is Joe Conrad, and then it makes this straightaway which goes down about 40 feet. And this comes then into the, again, the northern part, which runs along our property and eventually drops into Rose Island Road. So this is north, that's your property there on the bottom left-hand corner. That pond is there. And again, this is me sitting on my property, which, by the way, is all of this. I'm in here, okay?
Your property is on one of the bluffs, but.
That's correct. That overlooks the river, that's why I can see the pond slash water collection that has grown, you know, over the last 8 or 9 years. And there's a stream which then cuts through my area right in here, which comes from that pond.
Very good. And there was, in one of the opposition letters, there was a resolution to go to Press Pond.
Press pond.
And that's you as well.
No,
I made an exception.
Okay. Mr. Barker, do you have anything for him? Okay. All right, Dr. Barker, thank you.
very much.
Okay, thank you. All right, or John, Mr. Carter, what do you think about Mr. Kirk? And what do we need to do?
You mean about?
Well, questioning. He's got to leave at noon.
Well,
Well, I think you can allow questioning of an expert that has to leave out of order. is what we
Okay.
do.
Mr. Kirk, come back up and
He
if
would
any
be
commissioners,
considered an expert.
any commissioners have any questions for the traffic, yes, sir, Mr. Falvey.
no objection, or?
Sorry. Okay, thank you. All right. Mr. Falvey?
I do if I can fix my microphone. You mentioned site differences at the two, the Z curves, at both curves. What is, can you repeat those to me one more time? I didn't get it right down.
There's approximately 70 feet of stopping sections, so you can see 70 feet in front of you.
At 25 miles an hour.
As it is today, if you're out there, you can see 70 feet. In order to stop at 25 miles an hour, you need 155.
So double.
Essentially,
And that's at both curves. Okay.
Anything, any additional questions for Mr. Kirk before he has to go? Yes, sir, Mr. McWilliams.
I don't understand. In order to stop, I need 150 feet. I don't know what that has to do with anything.
sir, if you're traveling down the roadway at 25 miles an hour,
Right?
say a dog runs out in front of
Okay.
you. You see that dog, you put your foot on the brake, it takes you 155 feet to stop your vehicle.
Okay.
So that from the time that you see an object in the roadway,
Okay.
you're gonna travel 155 feet. What that means is that if there is an object, say, 140 feet down the roadway, but you can only see 70 feet, you're gonna hit that object.
Okay, so are we talking about in the curves?
Yes, sir. In the curves, you can only see
Yeah.
70
So many feet.
maximum around those curves. So if there were an object in front of you, you would not be able to stop in time before it striking that object at 25 miles.
Does that answer your question, sir?
Not really, but I don't know what to ask.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. Any additional questions for Mr. Kirk from the commissioners? Yes, sir, Mr. Falvey.
Maybe just a follow-up to that. You've seen what they're going to, or what they're proposing to improve that road. Does that change that at all?
It changes a little bit if you are trailing down that roadway. Right now, the roadway is so narrow that you cannot see an oncoming vehicle, and you would essentially strike an oncoming vehicle when you're traveling 25 miles. What they're doing is they are widening that road so the two vehicles can actually pass through the curve. What doesn't change is that the radius of the curvature does not appear to change. So that's why you have, you must slow down significantly in order to negotiate that curve. And that's why we have these single vehicle crashes, because you have to slow down so much that as you're approaching that curve, if you don't know how much you need to slow down or the curb is too tight, that's how the single vehicle crashes occur. So it does allow those vehicles to pass. Still, if somebody's walking, say, on the inside of that curb, there still would not be enough sight distance unless that were addressed by clearing brush, cutting the slope back in order to improve the sight distance through that curve.
Okay, Mr. Finney?
Just a follow-up question on that same vein. Basically, even with the improvement, if two cars were meeting in the curve and yet there was a pedestrian on the side of the road, the pedestrian would still be in danger.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Talbot, do you have a question for him, or any questions?
Thank you very much. I got your first, is it Adam?
It's Adam.
Adam Kirk?
Kirk. Got
Mr. Kirk, thank you very
two
much.
last names.
Are you familiar with the critical crash rate factor and what that signifies?
Yes, I am.
Can you describe what that means?
The critical crash rate is it's a factor to where all roads have crashes. We haven't gotten to the point to where we can design a road without any crashes. The critical crash rate is an older metric that we used back to about 2012, where we identified there's an average rate, but crashes are kind of random, so there's a little bit of fluctuation in those. And as what you would see is, one year you may not have any crashes, and next year you might have 3, so it fluctuates. And we put on a statistical buffer, essentially over the average rate, and we developed the critical rate. The critical rate says if your average rate's 2 crashes, your critical rate may be 3, to make sure that we're above that level. So the critical rate factor then takes your critical rate, divides it by your average rate, and gives you your critical rate factor.
I would assume you would agree it's an authoritative figure for traffic analysis and safety, correct?
I wouldn't right now. Actually, what's happened is the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet has moved away from that because it basically just projects a linear
Is
crash rate.
there a more current?
There is.
What is that?
They're currently using what's called excess crashes in order to rate those. So that looks at, it develops what's called a safety performance function. The safety performance function can be based on roadway functional class, roadway volume, roadway speeds, roadway geometry, and predicts the number of crashes. And then it compares the predicted number of crashes to the actual number of crashes, and that difference is what's known as an excess crash rate.
Did you run those figures for Goshen Lane?
No,
Did you run the older critical crash rate factor for Goshen Lane?
no, I didn't.
And on the critical crash rate factor, it's my understanding if it's less than 1, that's significant. Is that correct?
No, if it is over 1, then it's...
1 is the critical. If you go over 1, it's dangerous. If it's less than 1, it's safe. Is that, in layman's terms, a pretty good way to...
If it is over 1, it is statistically higher than the average rate.
Let me ask you this question. You've seen the road improvements that we've suggested. Would you agree that will tremendously improve this road?
I think it will help with the sideswipe crashes. So we do have sideswipe
Do you think
crashes.
it'll make it easier for buses to get by?
Like I said, right now we've got 2 crash types where there's a sideswipe crash where people are passing, and that's due strictly to the width. So I think that widening the roadway through this section would address those sideswipe crashes. Because we're not addressing the curvature, because it doesn't appear to be addressing the sight distance, then I do think that the single vehicle crashes would still remain.
Do you agree that, you probably heard my comments on my presentation, that increasing Goshen Lane beyond 18 feet, where it's going to cinch down to 13 feet or 15 feet, would not be a good idea? Would you agree that you don't want to have that hourglass effect as much as possible?
I don't.
Let me ask it this way. If we increase the road to 22 feet, and even wider with curb and gutter, and it immediately cinches down to 13 feet, where it gets pretty thin on North Goshen, would that be a safe condition or an unsafe condition?
You would see anything where we've got a high-speed roadway and you go into a low-speed roadway, in that transition, you see safety problems. At the same time, right now, we've got a straight section, and then it goes into the narrow, curvy section, so you see safety problems there, which is there's one at Plantation. Widening that road out if traffic would then continue through there, that would again be a safety problem. So just addressing the section 2 plantation and then allowing it to neck down to about 11 feet wide, I think does create a safety problem.
So you would agree that our plan of increasing to 18 feet, which is what the county has already expanded it down a little bit past Valley, is probably the appropriate width for this road, if you're gonna make improvements currently?
Looking at the subdivision regulations, I think it's the 22 feet for.
Well, that's not my question about the regulation. I'm asking from a safety standpoint. You would agree that 18 feet that we've recommended would be the safest way to go about it, would you agree?
No.
You would not agree. I thought you just said to make it wider and having it vary is not a good idea.
You are making it wider.
About where Valley, if you're coming from US 42 past Valley Drive, it's
Yes.
currently 18 feet.
Yes.
And then it cinches down. We're going to expand that part to 18 feet so it matches what it currently is. You would agree that's a good idea, correct?
And then beyond
Well, just
Valley.
answer my first question first. You agree that's a good idea, correct?
To widen the roadway, yes.
Yeah, to 18 feet, correct?
I think that at 18 feet, if you look at the design vehicle, or say a bus or delivery vehicle, they're about 8.5 feet wide. So if you have two of those passing, you're looking at about 17 feet, and that's, touching. You add on mirrors, and we're losing mirrors. So, I mean, I don't know if necessarily 18 feet is.
Mr. Tapper, are you about to wrap up here?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just finish up. I'm asking from a safety standpoint, your testimony was to keep it the same. We're going to keep it the same at 18 feet
I
and
don't
match
believe I
that.
said, I don't believe I said that we need to keep it the same. I don't know if there's an appreciable difference between 18 and say 21 feet, if that's what you're asking. If you're asking if 18 feet is safer, I'm not agreeing with that.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Okay. Mr. Barkley, do you have anything with it, a question for Mr. Carter?
Do you agree that it would be safer, this road?
I need to get you to back up to the mic, please.
Oh, forgive me. Do you agree that Goshen Lane would be safer if it were expanded all the way to Rose Island Road?
Yes.
Why?
If you look at.
Say that again. I don't know that everybody heard that.
I think the question was, would it be safer if Goshen Lane were expanded all the way to Rose Island? And I think the answer to that is yes. It's a very narrow cross-section. We see single vehicle crashes at the site of the fatality as well. And widening that roadway, but I think in addition to widening, but also improving geometrics along the roadway, looking at curvature and things like that, would make it safer. And it's the same on the site south, is it making geometric improvements at the Z-curves to widen or match, I think it was a 135-foot radius suggested by the county engineer. That would improve safety along the road.
Barkley, anything else? Okay. With that, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And we will take a recess. It's about 10 minutes after 12. We'll try to be back here about 5 minutes after 1 and continue with the 15 minutes expanded questioning time for the opposition, testimony. So if I remind you again, please don't talk to the commissioners at lunch today. We stand adjourned.